This podcast is a production of Widener Law Commonwealth in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Now here's your host, Julie Massing.
Wanted to thank everybody out there for joining us today. And today we are speaking with Dean John Benfield. He is the Associate Dean of Admissions and Administration here at Widener Law Commonwealth. And I'm your host, Julie Massing. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the process that is applying to law school. I know that this process can be sometimes overwhelming for a lot of people, so Dean Benfield is going to break down this process for us. So can you first just tell us a little bit about the process in general?
For most people, because they've never applied to law school, it is kind of overwhelming, and people who are applying to law school usually like to think that they are in control. And the reality of it is, once they hit the submit button, they're not in control. And so the pieces that an admissions office is going to review and consider, it's important that the applicant sort of know those pieces and how best to address them and to what questions to try to kind of move themselves, if you will, on the other side of the table and become the admissions person. And what would you want to know if you were making that decision? So there are lots of pieces, but we can demystify it pretty quickly, I think.
Okay. Now, you talked about some key pieces there. So why don't we start with one of the bigger pieces, which is the LSAT and the GPA. Can you tell me a little bit about the LSAT? What those letters stand for, where people maybe go to take this test, what kind of bearing it has on their admission and their application.
Sure. Probably the single most important factor in most applications to law school is the LSAT, and that stands for the Law School Admission Test. And it's offered by LSAC, which is the Law School Admission Council. So a great resource for information on the LSAT is lsac.org. And there you can register for the LSAT, you can set up your file, you can begin the application process, etc. The LSAT is unlike other standardized tests in that it is only offered 4 times a year. It is still a pen and paper test, if you will. No online, no show up at a test center to take it. 4 times a year, so you really need to be very strategic about when you're going to take it so that you are ready for it. The LSAT is offered in June, October, December, and February. Most students who are applying for fall admission are probably looking at the October-December test, though if you're really ahead of the game, you might take the June test in the end of your junior year if you're coming straight out of undergrad. February test, lots of schools are now taking that because the applicant pool is down nationally. So schools are willing to look at the February score. February scores are not released until early March, which for some students means that it's late when those scores get processed and a decision could be made, but it's not terribly late by any means. So LSAT is offered 4 times a year. You can take it 3 times in a 2-year period. That's the most you can do. My advice is always study for it, prepare for it, be ready for it, and take it 1 time. If you get the score back, you're not happy, you can always retake it. It's a couple $100 to take it, so it's not cheap. But you want to be ready for it when you do. The scoring scale is a 120. You get that for signing your name. 180 is the perfect score. So different schools have a different range of scores that they're looking for. But you want to study for it, prepare for it. It's a logical reasoning, analytical reasoning, and a reading comprehension test. It's a timed test. So you really want to study for it, prepare for it, and as I say, be ready for it when you go in to take it.
Now, you said it's still a pen and paper test. Can you explain what you mean a little bit by that, and maybe the formatting of the questions that you see?
Yeah, the questions are, there are about 100 questions or so. It's in 4 parts, and they're timed. What I mean by pen and paper is you got to bubble in with a number 2 pencil on your answer sheet. So be careful when you're bubbling in and don't skip around, and otherwise you're going to get way off and your score is going to reflect that. So that's what I mean by a pen and paper test. So I guess it's really a pencil and paper test as opposed to pen, unless you're really sure of your answers, but most people are not. So they're going to use a number 2 lead pencil to do it. Questions are, you got blue-eyed people, green-eyed people, brown-eyed people sitting at a table. No blue-eyed person can sit next to a brown-eyed person, but a green-eyed person has to sit next to a blue-eyed person. What's the correct arrangement of the seating chart? And then they give you the options there, A, B, C, D, E, what have you, and you got to figure it out. So that's sort of the logical reasoning part. Some people would say, well, you can't study for a test like that. It's not really true. It's like learning to spot patterns and things like that, and would be able to move more quickly through the test. So you really do want to study for it. You can buy from LSAC that I mentioned earlier. You can buy from them a set of 10 old tests for $20. There are 4 of those sets available now. So for less than $100, you could get 40 old original LSATs that you could sit down and study with and work through and play with. And I always advise students that you want to play around with some, just use them as working pieces, and then sit down on a Saturday under as close as you can create timed conditions and take a whole test and see how you're scoring so that you're establishing some baseline data. And of course, there are always structured review courses that people can take. Those run in price from $1,000 to $2,000. A lot of students are going to say, well, I don't have that kind of money. Well, maybe you don't need to spend it if you're already doing pretty well on your own. Okay. On the other hand, spending $2,000 to get into a law school and get a scholarship that's going to multiply over the 3 years you're there could be a really good $2,000 investment. Mm-hmm. If you get into a law school and get $20,000 of scholarship a year, that $2,000 becomes $60,000. So I guess 57 or so. But anyway.
Do you see in students that tend to take those opportunities through the LSAC that maybe buy those tests and they take those pre-programs, do you see a significant jump in their LSAT, or have you experienced or heard from students who have benefited from those?
Yeah, the only data that's ever been really done on who does better on the LSAT tends to be real basic. If you study for it, you do better than if you don't. So how you study for it, I think it depends on the individual. Some people have taken structured review courses and felt that they were being taught to think a way that they did not normally think, and so it messed them up.
Okay.
For others, it's made all the difference in the world. And so I think, what I always tell people is, before I go off and spend $1,500 to invest in a structured review course, you need to sit down and get some baseline over a period of time. And if you are continually scoring at 140, it's probably not going to get you into law school. So you might want to go and pull out the stops and invest in a structured review course. On the other hand, if you're consistently scoring under timed conditions, 170, maybe you don't need a structured review course. So I think you got to have some kind of baseline to sort of begin to develop whether you want to invest that money or not. Because some people say, oh gosh, I did terrible on the LSAT. And you say, well, what'd you make? And they say, well, I only made a 165. Well, that's moving into the upper 80th percentile score. Mm-hmm. It's really a pretty good score. Mm-hmm. You say, well, gosh, that's really pretty good. And they say, yeah, but in all of my samples, I was making 172s. So you probably should go back and retake it.
Okay.
But without the baseline, you don't know what's a good score and what's a bad score.
Right. And I'm going to move on to just a couple other key points that we have.
Well, one thing I would say just quickly about the LSAT is law schools use the high score when they are reporting statistics. So if you take the test and don't do as well and go back and retake it and your score goes up, law schools are going to use the high score. Okay. So, what you got to lose on the one hand except the $200.
Right. Okay. Now, also included in that application packet includes a personal statement.
Yeah.
Can you give a few details about the personal statement? Does everybody have to have one? What are you looking for in those? What kind of purpose do they serve?
Sure. Well, I think you have to read the law school application directions carefully, because not every law school is asking for the same thing. At Widener Law Commonwealth, we are asking for a personal statement. We require one. And I think most law schools do. The personal statement is, first of all, a writing sample. It's a chance to tell the law school admissions officer something that they don't know from somewhere else. From your LSA T-score CAS report, which is all the stuff that we get on a student. I have your transcripts. I know where you went to school. I know what your major was. I know what kind of grades you got. All of that I already know from other pieces. So you don't need to tell me in a personal statement, I went to college at and I majored in. Already got it. So it's a chance to do what I call sell yourself. So if you think about a personal statement as a chance to tell the admissions committee something you would want them to know before they closed the file and made a decision, then you need to think about that. Okay. Some law schools are going to be very specific in terms of how many words. And you need to read the directions for each law school application, because if one just says write a personal statement and gives you no direction, but one says in 250 words, you can't use the same personal statement for the two law schools, probably. So you want to think about that. I've got a friend who says, if you don't know what to write your personal statement about, ask your mama what makes you special and write about that. Because, a lot of times we're taught not to brag, not to toot our own horn. And there is that thin line between being, the big braggart about how fabulous and wonderful I am and providing information. So you want to think about that. The other thing I always tell people is with your personal statement, you do not know who is reading it. You do not know if I'm a Republican or a Democrat. You do not know if I'm an atheist or a right-wing, born-again evangelical Christian. You do not know anything about who may be reading your file. So you don't want to get too far left or right. And so people then say, well, can I write about religion? It's really important to me. Or can I write about politics? Sure you can. But be sensitive that if you go too extreme one way or the other, you may very well be alienating someone. But above all, please proof it, edit it, read it out loud, and read the words that are actually typed. And above all else, if you get to the end of it and you decide you're using the same personal statement for every law school you're applying to, make sure that you change the law school before you send it to me, so that if it says I look forward to enrolling in X law school and I'm Y law school, there's a law school in New York that circles that, sends it back to you, and wishes you luck because they just rejected you. So proof it, edit it. It's a great selling document. Mm-hmm. Keep it positive. Mm-hmm. If there are negatives in your file, we might talk about that a little bit, then you might need to do an addendum to explain it. Okay. But, you want to keep it positive and tell us something that we don't already know and make it interesting. I mean, somebody's got to actually read it. So if you've lost me in the first paragraph, Yeah. So be sensitive to your reader.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And, another piece of this is the letters of recommendation. Some, as we touched on a little bit, some law schools say, yes, include certain things. Other law schools say, no, we don't really need those. But, sometimes.
Well, we require 2 letters of recommendation. Most law schools do. They always say positive things, or typically. It's when you get a bad letter of recommendation that can be a showstopper. The letters of recommendation, they have to go through LSAC or come directly from the letter writer. It's best that they not be from your mother or your father. Now, while they might advise you about what to write your personal statement about, they shouldn't be the ones recommending you for law school, because usually your mother likes you. That's not always a given, but in most cases. So, think about who you want to write the letter of recommendation. For somebody coming straight out of undergraduate school or straight out of grad program, probably an academic letter is one that would need to be there. But I don't need 3 letters from faculty members, because I've got your transcript. If you already got a 3.8 GPA, I gather you're a good student, and I believe the first person that told me that. So who else do you get the letters from? Well, from somebody that you've worked with, somebody that's known you your whole life, somebody that you've done volunteer work, community, church, civic organization work with. But again, the letters of recommendation sort of show the well-roundedness of the person and offer support from different angles. So think about that as you think about who you're going to ask. And I also think that you want to, when you go to ask the person to write the letter, you want to be sure to say, would you write me a good letter of recommendation? Because we do see bad letters of recommendation, and they really can cause a problem for an applicant.
Yeah, I can understand where that could go wrong pretty quickly.
Yeah, and even the ones that try to be funny and sort of damn you with faint praise and say, they were a good student when they showed up for class. Well, you don't know if they didn't come to class often or, what was going on there. So remind them they're serious.
Okay. Now, I just want to circle back a little bit. We talked about the LSAT earlier. Let's talk a little bit about the GPA and how much bearing that has on your application. And do the LSAT and the GPA, do those go kind of hand in hand when you're looking at an application?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first two things that a lot of law schools are looking at, and in terms of academic predictors for success in law school, the two strongest are LSAT and GPA. The LSAT would be the one that's created equal. Everybody has taken it within the last 3 years. It's a standard test. Everybody's required to take it. GPAs, a 3.8 from Podunk State in basket weaving versus a 3.8 in biochemical engineering honors program at top school. They're not the same 3.8 necessarily, but of course when we report numbers, we report the GPA. And it's the GPA on the first earned bachelor's degree. So it's not what you majored in, it's not last semester's GPA, it's your whole academic career, courses that went into you receiving your bachelor's. Anything earned after the bachelor's degree, even that art history course you went back and took because you just wanted to take it, that is classed as graduate work.
Okay.
So once you graduate, first earned bachelor's degree.
Okay.
If you went to summer school at Podunk Tech and had those transferred to your undergraduate school, the undergraduate school gave you the hours credit, but not the grade. Law Services would give you the grade. So your GPA that Law Services calculates for you can be higher than the GPA on your transcript.
Okay, I'm going to stop you. What is Law Services?
Law Services is the group that does the LSAT and that administers it. That's part of LSAC. There are a lot of acronyms running around out there with L's on them. And those of us who have been in the business for a while, we just roll them off like we think everybody knows what they are. But the LSA, Law Services, is the entity that administers the LSAT and that sort of coordinates your LSAT score being sent to to law schools. So it's sort of the umbrella organization, if you will.
Okay.
So that's what Law Services is.
Okay, and then so they have bearing on being able to apply that grade to the transcript that somebody had earned credits at maybe a community college and then applied to a bachelor's degree at a 4-year college.
Right. Well, what an applicant needs to do, and then beyond that, I wouldn't worry about it. But what they want to do as an applicant is you need to have a transcript from every college or university you attended.
Okay.
You need to have that transcript or those transcripts sent to Law Services. And Law Services then will coordinate that, and they will calculate for you a grade point average.
Okay.
And you will be told what Law Services says your GPA is. So if you open your mail and look at it, you'll know what they're telling law schools your GPA is.
Okay.
And so law schools are given 2 separate GPAs. Sometimes they're identical, but one is a GPA from the degree granting school. So if I went for 2 years to Podunk Tech and then 2 years to State University, my degree granting institution is State University, and my GPA there may be 3.4. But because I had a 4.0 on 60 hours at Podunk Tech, and that transferred there, my LSAC cumulative GPA may be a 3.8.
Okay.
3.8 is what we're going to use because that incorporates all the grades that went in. Yes.
Okay.
So that's why it's really important that students have transcripts from every college or university attended. Even if it's only one course, a 4-hour credit course with a 4.0 might bump your GPA slightly up. Mm-hmm. So you just want to make sure that you're giving a law school everything.
Okay. And as we're kind of ticking down the list of things, can we talk a little bit about resumes?
Yes.
I imagine you see the gamut run with really great ones and some that are not so hot. So what makes a good resume, and where can people go to get resume help?
Well, there are good resumes and there are really bad resumes. And I think I would tell people, first of all, the resume that you're sending with your law school application is not necessarily the resume that you would send to an employer, a potential employer. Not every law school requires or asks for a resume. Nobody's going to return it to you. So I always advise applicants to include a resume. At Widener Law Commonwealth, we require a resume. So great, probably in most every case, one-page summary of this person's attributes. Probably the best place to go if you're in undergraduate school is to your career services office or your counseling center or somewhere and get some professional help with it. But a lot of those offices are accustomed to resumes for jobs, etc. So pre-law advisor might be a good place to go to get some help with that. I think the thing that I would tell you with your resume for law school is it can be very different from a resume that you would send out to an employer. And what I mean is you don't really need all that stuff at the top about your name and address. I mean, I already got that. So, you probably want your name on it, so if it gets separated, we know whose it is. If you're going to have an objective, it probably should say seeking admission to law school, not looking for a sales job. We're not hiring salespeople this week. So, you want to make sure that it's tailored to a law school. I think it's really important on a resume to put level of commitment and hours and that sort of thing. Oftentimes people will say Habitat for Humanity. When they list extra or activities, they'll say Habitat for Humanity or Relay for Life or whatever it may be. Well, the problem with that is I don't know if you went once because your mother made you, or you went because your fraternity or sorority had to go, or you have been going once a month to animal shelters for the last 5 years. So it really helps to know what the level of commitment is to these activities that you have opted to include on your resume. Otherwise, it's like, so did you do Habitat once, or did you just go because you had, to do something to get off your criminal record, or, what was it that you did, and what's your level of commitment? Okay. So I think those kinds of things can be really helpful with regard to that. Plus, a resume allows you, it frees you up to then, when you write your personal statement, to either write about something very specific on the resume or write about something totally different. Because, again, you don't want to be duplicating, telling me the same thing in multiple places.
Right.
I mean, you only got so many pages.
You want to make it interesting.
Exactly.
Make it a good read.
Exactly.
And that kind of leads me into, what if there's other parts of the story? Do we need to include an addendum? Why would somebody do that?
Well, there are lots of good reasons to do an addendum, Julie. One, as I said earlier, the personal statement to me is a selling document. It should really be positive. It's your chance to go full force about how wonderful I am, and you'd be a fool not to admit me to law school. But this is why you want me in your class. But when I look at your application and I see that you have a very high, solid, competitive GPA, but you've taken the LSAT twice and it's not so hot, those two numbers don't match up. So the most common reason for an addendum is to do what I call explain any problems. So the problem in that scenario is you got a really bad LSAT, but you got a great GPA. So it would be helpful to know, how did you study for the LSAT? How have you historically done on standardized tests? And maybe we need to backtrack and say, okay, in high school I was in the honors program and I did great. I took the SATs or the ACTs 3 times and never broke whatever. I was admitted on probation to a school, but I wasn't admitted to the honors program. But then after a semester, I was. And your argument then, of course, is that a standardized test is not the best predictor of my ability. My performance over 4 years is the better predictor. For some, an addendum would be you're running along in your first year of undergraduate school is good, but then your second year the grades plummet, and then they go back up. I think it's a fair question for me to ask, or at least wonder, so what happened during your sophomore year or your junior year? If it's bad grades in the freshman year, I can usually guess it's one of 2 or 3 things. You probably want to tell me, though, so I don't make assumptions that are not in your favor, which is usually the way they go. And just say, I partied too much. I joined a sorority. I wasn't a good manager of my time. Or, if it's later in this academic career, it may be that your mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, or that your father died, or that you were going back and forth home to help take care of a child or a sibling or whatever it may be. So if you don't tell me what's going on, routinely, as I say, the assumptions are not in your favor, and to me, that's evidence or information that you would want me to have before I shut the file and make a decision. And I think if an applicant's always thinking about it in legal terms, and if they're always thinking, I need to give the admissions office the evidence they need to convince them to admit me, what else do I need to know about you? What you're going to give me? So the addendums can be very helpful. Okay. But they're usually explaining a problem, and I use the word problem very loosely.
Okay. And can we talk a little bit about the big one, which is character and fitness?
Sure.
Explain what character and fitness is, and how an admissions office would, characterize that and take a look at it, and what do prospective students really need to tell the admissions office when they apply?
First of all, they need to read the question on applications carefully regarding character and fitness, because different schools ask different questions. Some law schools ask, have you ever been charged of anything other than a minor traffic violation? Some law schools say, have you ever been convicted of anything other than a minor traffic violation? And even though you haven't been to law school yet, there is a huge difference between being charged and being convicted. So if the law school asks, have you ever been convicted, and you go into this long list of things that you were charged with, but they were all dismissed, you've given me information that's probably not very helpful for you. Because now I know stuff that I didn't ask for, I didn't really need to know, but now that I know it, it raises a question about your character. The issue with character and fitness is that a law school, while they're not the ones who decide if you can be admitted to practice law in any state, we obviously, as admissions officers, as gatekeepers of the legal profession to some degree, are looking at potential lawyers to see, are they going to be able to jump that next hurdle? Because if you're not, then it seems a bit unfair to me to offer you admission to law school knowing you'll never be admitted to a bar and let you invest $140,000, $150,000 in getting a degree that you may never be able to use. But law schools are not the ones who decide if you pass character and fitness. Those are questions that are made by each bar. So if somebody has a significant criminal record, while the law school might very well admit them because it was a long time ago, or we're just bleeding heart liberals and just think, why not? That doesn't mean that the bar is going to admit you. And so even if I admitted you, I would eventually write you a letter that says, while I'm okay with what you've done and what you've told me, you may have issues with character and fitness, so prior to enrolling in law school and investing, you may want to contact character and fitness in the jurisdiction in which you seek to practice to see if it's going to be an obstacle for your admission to the bar. And most states will give you some guidance on that. The reality of it is that probably one of anything is not going to keep you out of law school. Law schools, I think, are looking at patterns of behavior. So you got the underage possession, you got the open container, you got the public disorderly conduct, and then you got the DUI. One of those by itself wouldn't have been probably an issue. But now we've got a pattern, yeah. Mm-hmm. So you got to be careful with that. And things that happened a long time ago are less significant than things that happened while you were applying to law school. So don't get a DUI after while you're submitting your application to law school. Mm-hmm. So you want to be sensitive to that. But the key part of the question in almost every application is, have you ever? And that means at any point in time. So even if your mother doesn't know about it, you really should tell the law school. And most applications say you must reveal even if the record has been sealed, expunged, adjudicated as a minor, or you went through pretrial intervention. So you're always better off to tell the law school. If you're in doubt as to whether to tell us or not, you probably should tell us. Mm-hmm. Because frequently it's the failure to be candid and honest and forthright that's a bigger issue than what you didn't tell us about. Right. So kids oftentimes get bad information because somebody will say, oh no, you don't have to tell them that. Well, if you're not sure, call the admissions office at the law school, and ask. Because it's horrible to be a third-year student and come in and say, oh, I forgot to tell you about. Because then we can revoke the offer of acceptance, and you've been sitting here for 3 years and paying money. It's like, well, you committed fraud on the application. So always be careful about it. When you actually apply for the bar, they're going to ask for copies of your driving record. A lot of law schools now ask for driving records. Others don't. If you have a horrible driving record and a law school doesn't ask for it, I don't think I would give it to them. Because if it shows that you're speeding all the time and disregarding traffic signs, it's a sign of bad judgment. But I think the real important thing on character and fitness issues is patterns of behavior are going to slam you. I think it's important to take responsibility for what you did and what did you learn from it, and sort of fall on your sword, if you will, and say it'll never happen again and blah, 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 blah. But, don't be blaming, well, it was my friend's car, it was my friend's backpack, and I didn't know that there was 2 pounds of cocaine in there. So, I don't know what happened there. So take responsibility for it and move on.
Okay. Now, we've covered a lot of information, and I think that we've given our audience some pretty good tips about, applying for law school. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we kind of wrap up?
Oh my goodness, there's just so much to talk about and think about, but I think maybe we'll have to do that another day. I think that, one of the things that people always need to think about is scholarships and how they're going to pay for law school. And I think it's really important to, as you look at law schools and start to think about where you're going to apply, and probably even before you're accepted in some cases if feasible, you need to visit law schools. And I always encourage people to go visit law schools, even if it's not a law school that you think you're interested in. It at least gives you a basis on which to compare law schools as you begin to decide where you are interested. And I think it's really about listening to your gut. What size law school do you want to be in? How big an entering class? How small? How close to home? Capital city versus rural area. I mean, there's so many things. Law schools are so much more alike than we are different. But it's about fit for you. And so you want to make sure it's a good fit, and you want to make sure you can pay for it.
Okay. I just wanted to ask you one fun question before we finished up here. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book? Oh, goodness.
Or maybe a favorite author?
Oh, well, probably nobody has picked up on it yet, but I'm a Southerner. And so, I love Pat Conroy. He writes beautifully about the South Carolina Low Country and describes in great detail, probably more than most people want to know, but he's fabulous. He recently passed away, but great writer. Prince of Tides, Beach Music, Lords of Discipline. He just, right before he died, did My Reading Life. It's really good. He's even done a cookbook, and the stories leading up to the recipes are great. On a lighter note, I tend to like Flynn and Brad Thor and David Baldacci. Grisham I've gotten a little old on, but I always know who's going to jump on the jet and fly away before it happens. But he still writes some good stuff, so there are lots of good things out there.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and please tune in to a future podcast where we talk about scholarships and financial aid for potential law students.
For more information about Widener Law Commonwealth's podcast, visit commonwealthlaw.widener.edu/podcast.